Welcome to MSUA's Game Changers Live, where we speak with satellite and mobile connectivity thought leaders about industry trends, new technologies, and share what you need to know about where satellite technology is headed in the future. I'm your host, Lisa Dreer, and I'm really excited to introduce our guest for today, Isabel LeBoutillier. She is the Vice President of Customer Operations at Kymeta. Welcome to the show, Isabel.
Thank you, Lisa. Happy to be here with you.
Absolutely. Maybe you can start by giving us a little bit of background on yourself and Kymeta.
Sure. So hopefully your listeners will be familiar with Kymeta to some degree, but Kymeta is making mobile global, as we say, is the, I believe, only company who has produced a flat panel comms on the move, broadband capable, terminalized piece of hardware that is fielded, has been fielded for many years actually now. Um, in the satellite communications industry. And so it has really revolutionized how satellite communication works, applications that are available. We really targeted the land mobile industry, but I think we're going to see, and we'll probably talk about today, how that's going to expand even further over the coming years. My role at Kymeta is, as you said, VP of Customer Operations, and that's really post-sales customer operations. And so really my job is to make sure our customers are happy. But a part of that is maybe less visible to some of your users is actually overseeing our network services offering and operations. And so a very talented team of technical people who I oversee are doing that every day. And then we also have all of our technical support staff who are supporting the post-sales operations or help me do my job every day as well.
Wow, that's great. So how did you end up being in this position at Kymeta?
So I actually started a company with another colleague, almost 10 years ago now. It was a really small business, but we did have a global satellite communications footprint as a managed service provider. It was called Lepton Global Solutions, and we really focused on flexible solutions for government users. And we were really looking for kind of the things that were too small for the big players to be interested in, that required agility and flexibility. And so we did that business for a number of years together, and we were starting to work with Kymeta. Kymeta was interested in expanding their portfolio of offerings to go just from a manufacturer to really a solutions provider. And so part of that was starting to offer the network services. And so Kymeta acquired Lepton Global Solutions in August of 2020, and I've been with the team ever since. It's been great.
Wow, amazing. What an amazing background. Well, thank you for giving us that overview. And maybe we can start by having you talk a little bit about what you feel is the most important role that the satellite industry has to play in the future of mobile connectivity.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think my answer is probably going to sound like a tagline or the branding that you see in a lot of satellite communications businesses, but it really will, I think, in the future enable a high speed, always on, always connected experience. And the difference between, maybe the branding that we see today and the future is that it's going to extend beyond just sort of the traditional satellite customers to a broader consumer base. The promise of LEOs, although they're yet to be fully deployed, is a broadband experience, beyond the limits of cellular. And when we think about autonomous vehicles, different industry, but future technology that's coming, how that will change our travel choices and experience, with the combination of satellite connectivity, entirely new opportunities sort of open to how we think about working, commuting, traveling. Kymeta's contribution, to this future is obviously enabling the capability, the remote edge, which is a hugely important piece of the puzzle and a tricky piece of the puzzle. And our long distance sort of vision is the connected car. But I really envision the day where, a mom, talking about myself here, can get in her car in a somewhat rural area and drive to her son's daycare to pick him up and not have a Teams call drop. Because the cellular connectivity isn't great here, even though it's a pretty big town. So that kind of day-to-day experience, I think we're not going to think about it in the future.
Mm-hmm.
We're not going to wonder, am I going to lose connectivity on this important call? Or, you might even get in your vehicle or a vehicle that's a 3-hour trip somewhere, and you really are working the whole time in the way that you can work when you travel, like on an airplane type of thing. So anyway, I think that the sort of the tagline of creating an always on connected experience is going to extend basically down into the mass consumer base.
Yeah, absolutely. It's it's amazing I guess how you don't have to get that far outside of a metropolitan area before you can really have a hard time keeping your connection. So,
Yep.
I think we're all really looking forward to that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think people sometimes don't, if you have it, you take it for granted. And then as soon as you don't have it, it's like, how is this possible?
And
And
you're so frustrated, right? So
that's right.
yeah. So when you're kind of talking a lot about what will happen in the future, what would you say are the most significant changes that we'll see, I guess, in the short term, in the next 3 to 5 years?
Yeah. So I think in that time frame, we're probably looking at sort of three key things. I think new form factors that aren't available today will be available for mobility purposes in particular. So for your user base. From a Kymeta perspective, I'm not sure how much I can share about our technology pipeline, but I'm sure it's okay for me to say that this is something we get a lot of feedback on from our customers. Particularly in the government space right now. And this is a user base that often drives technological developments because they typically are early funders.
Mhm.
But their needs are going to apply equally to other commercial applications across sort of the mobility landscape. So form factor and constellation compatibility, I guess I would say, are going to be something we continue to spend a lot of time on. I think you're going to hear about more and more from, at least from our perspective, going forward in that kind of 3 to 5 year time frame. And I know that our engineering and development and product teams are spending a lot of time on it now. The sort of second thing I think is you're going to see, and it's happening, but you're going to see an increase in transition to sort of software defined. Just generally software defined across the satellite solution. So from hubs and ground station infrastructure to literally satellites to the user terminal. We're
Mhm.
obviously more focused on the user terminal because that's what we can control. But I think you're going to move from sort of a vertically integrated, siloed, vendor locked ecosystem on all of these different components to an upgradable, modular, less siloed ecosystem that can evolve as a technology evolves. And you sort of future proof to a degree, your hardware choice. And then I think the third thing that kind of goes hand in hand with that is that really opens the door to increased edge to cloud interactions. And so you're going to see more locally hosted application services, again, future proofing your hardware, virtualizing your hardware, and having value added services and applications at the edge. I think a lot about sort of security applications. I'm sure there are people much smarter than me who can add to that list of applications that you could host locally on your user terminal that are based in a cloud and that can be virtualized and even probably configured to order over time.
Mhm. Mhm. There's been a lot of talk in the industry about implementing more industry standards and moving away from proprietary solutions. Well, what's your perspective and what is Kymeta doing in terms of industry standardizing the satellite communications solutions?
Yeah. So my background when I was at Lepton was really DoD focused. And I think the DoD space is a really good example of this trend. There's been a huge push for interoperability is the key word
Mhm.
in the DoD and government satellite space. In conjunction with this drive for PACE solutions, and PACE stands for primary, alternate, contingency, and emergency. And so basically what this means is that you have, your preferred communications, which is your primary method, but you also need not just a redundant solution, which has been sort of thrown around in the past, but you really need plans B, C, and D. And they have to meet certain conditions depending on your mission.
Mhm.
And so this type of PACE communications planning really requires a solution that can work across different platforms all at once. Obviously, sort of leaning towards, a more vendor agnostic type platform that has that ability. So in the DoD space, for example, you would imagine like an Army company having to have 4 different vendor siloed user terminals for each of these planning requirements if they don't have a platform that can work across across different solutions. So not only would the cost be prohibitive, but the logistics, the maintenance requirements, the training, even the portability, of a proprietary solution is just not the way forward in the US DoD market.
Yeah.
So what Kymeta is doing to kind of address this from our manufacturer perspective is, we're creating terminals with this, and particularly for the government space where this requirement is pretty well defined. So the Osprey terminal, which is the mill variant of our U8 platform, has cellular capability, a geo capability, a LEO capability, and the capability to bring an external modem, with a totally different network to bear. So you literally have 4 different unique ways of communicating across one platform. And so I think that's a great example of how are we addressing, this interoperability and pace. We are a geo service provider. We manage our own network, and we use the cubic telecom cellular backbone to provide a global cell capability. But that doesn't mean that we're not offering these other opportunities for communicating, because we recognize that this is just it's a proprietary sort of waveform or solution is just non-functional, and it creates vulnerabilities that are just now considered unacceptable in sort of the modern communications ecosystem.
Yeah, absolutely. When you look at the satellite industry, I think we are in the midst of perhaps more change than we've ever seen historically in the industry. There's more commercialization of the space industry, there's acquisitions happening and mergers, and the market is shifting, and requirements from our customers are changing every day and increasing, kind of like you're talking about here. What do you see as kind of how all of these changes happening at the same time, how will this actually benefit users?
Yeah, it's a really exciting time to be in space. And for being as mystifying as it is, instant communications via objects the size of buses orbiting in the atmosphere. Really, until about 10 or 15 years ago, the satellite industry was using most of the same technology that it started with some incremental gains. So it's a bit of a dinosaur of an industry. When I was getting into the industry, and I'm relatively young, the idea of a manual point broadband satellite terminal that could be carried by one person was really considered groundbreaking. And we fast forward to today, and we have this mass emergence of new space technologies, not just in the communications side, but across the entire industry, from debris cleanup to small sats to launch systems, that are totally sort of disrupting how this has been done forever and ever. It's pulled huge amounts of capital and interest from the finance world, from high net worth individuals who have a really keen interest in their visions and how this industry plays into those. It's really disrupting traditional players, to your point. I think as with any infusion of innovation and capital and technology into an industry, and we've really seen it takes a visionary, it takes someone who has patience and a lot of capital. This is not an industry where things turn around quickly. And there's a high failure rate, right? Because, for a satellite, you don't know if it works until you send it into space. It's hard to do much about it once it's up there. I think this evolution for space-based solutions will inevitably drive new technologies. Kymeta is a great example. So we're bringing satellite to land mobility in a way that has just not been an option before. We've, for a number of years now, we already have terminals in the field. We have hundreds, maybe thousands of terminals in the field now that customers are using to, have a broadband experience on their vehicle in the middle of nowhere. That just wasn't an option before Kymeta. And of course, again, we have the long-term goal of equipping the connected car. And I think another part of that is you have lower price points for technology, and so which is sort of one of the great promises of the LEO constellations, right?
Yes.
bringing satellite to a user base, that just it wasn't an option for before from a price point. And then I think probably the last piece of that is you have competition. I mean, in some cases, it's probably almost personality-based competition, because you do have these kind of like really big, important people who are getting into the industry and on one level or another are competing with each other, that will drive better technology and more affordability.
Yeah, absolutely. When you look at things from the user perspective, what do you think users really need to be taking into account as they're looking at, both their hardware and their services from a satellite perspective? What criteria should they be thinking about as they're looking for a solution provider?
Yeah, so I think you've raised a huge issue already, which is interoperability. Again, it depends on what your use cases and your applications, but I think you want to think about, if my service provider goes down or my terminal has an issue in one way or another, what do I do? I think another thing is that this industry is really all of a sudden moving forward in leaps and bounds. And new technologies are going to be available soon that maybe aren't today. And you want to make sure that the manufacturer you're working with to acquire your terminals is at least designing for capability expansion and evolution.
Hmm.
I think gone are the days where you make a terminal, you sell it for 10 years, and then you make another terminal. You definitely don't want to be you don't want to be buying that kind of a product. I think in the services and solutions environment, um, so I think that the way that users are going to be, I hope the way that users are going to think about this in the future is not, what's my plan? What are the limits? How is it being connected? Which satellite am I using? I hope, and what we're trying to sell as Kymeta is a connectivity offering. And so they don't really care how they're connecting. They just want to be connected. And your provider is taking care of that through, least cost routing, through SD-WAN capabilities, on the terminal and that sort of thing. So I think you want to make sure that you're working with a company that is sort of forward thinking in that way. And obviously, this is a topic near and dear to my heart, but I think what is one of the most important things that often gets overlooked at the point of sale is, what is your customer service experience going to be? Particularly in the consumer electronics space, and I think just in our normal daily lives, the customer service experience has really become a help yourself model, app-based, FAQ-based. It's really difficult to speak to a real person or get an answer from someone who is actually knowledgeable about what you bought. And that works great with certain, your smart doorbell or your washing machine. But a satellite solution, is that it's a solution. And so there are a lot of great opportunities that we are certainly investing in for that self-help model. We have an amazing OSS layer that includes an app and a web portal with diagnostic capabilities and sort of self-healing capabilities. But at the end of the day, if you have a problem that's not solving, you've got to be able to get someone on the phone who knows what they're talking about to help you quickly. Because, this is, communications can be a matter of, they can be critical, right? And so
Yeah.
waiting a week or not being able to get anyone on the phone is just really, to me, it's not acceptable. And I will say, I think the one change that I probably, regret to some degree is that the tech space company mentality and leaders who've come into the industry have really brought that type of customer support mentality, I think. And I'm not sure that it is a good fit for our industry.
Yeah, agreed. Agreed. Well, I want to end with one last question, which is, as you may know, the Mobile Satellite Users Association, or MSUA, is celebrating our 30th anniversary this year. And with that in mind, I want you to kind of bring out your crystal ball and think about, what would you see as, your one big prediction for the next 30 years?
Yeah, it's hard not to go back 30 years, right, and think about what was going on then. And this question kind of reminds me of like the Saved by the Bell character with the enormous cell phone, who was like the cool kid in school, and how much our landscape has changed. There are probably people who would tell you that we are going to be beaming thoughts from our brains, to the people colonizing Mars in 30 years. I'm not sure I'm that. Maybe I'm a little more conservative than that on where we're going to be. I think sort of, one place my brain goes is to geopolitics and to the dangers and vulnerabilities that exist, as we rely more and more on space. And I think we're a little bit playing catch up in how we address some of those things. And then also things like space debris. I think we could have a conversation about the potential catastrophic things that could happen. I think in a lighter direction, I think we could focus on the business landscape. So I think you're going to have connectivity businesses, not satellite service operators or fiber companies or cellular companies. I think you're going to have connectivity businesses, and they might even be parts of other types of businesses, where it makes sense to have that kind of cross-pollination. And this sort of goes back to the idea of like consumers shouldn't have to worry about how they're connected. It should just be connectivity. And so I think what you're going to see is a massive evolution. And we're already starting to see it to some degree with consolidation across different constellation providers. But I think it's going to be at an even greater scale than we kind of imagine today. So that would be my, if you want to call it vertical integration, but I think it's really broader than that. I think it's like, across what you might even think are different industries today.
Yeah. Wow. Well, as that comes to pass, then we'll have to have you back on and we'll dig into that further.
I'm delighted to.
Absolutely. Well, I really want to thank you so much for being here today, Isabel. And I do want to also take a moment and thank the Mobile Satellite Users Association. To learn more about the MSUA, visit msua.org, and you can learn how to get our weekly newsletter, learn how to participate in the very important upcoming 2023 Mobile Satellite Users Innovation Awards, and much, much more. So be sure to visit msua.org, and we'll see you next time on Game Changers Live.
Thanks, Lisa.